Today, we're talking about how law firms interview and hires attorneys and law students and the three questions they evaluate applicants by. And this is a topic that I've talked about with everyone here before, but I'm talking about it again just because it's honestly, in my opinion, probably the most important topic and something that a lot of times people do not ever understand. And I want to make sure that at least I push it through one last time this week. I'm also going to be doing a webinar on these three things tomorrow for law firms. But today this is for candidates. And after the webinar, like I always do, I'll also be taking questions about pretty much anything that you want to ask about your career. Law firms evaluate resumes of candidates that are applying there, whether they're law students or attorneys, by asking really only three things. And the first one is, can you do the job? The second is, do you want to do the job? And the third is, will you commit to the job? And there's different ways that you can approach these questions, but these are the most important of the three. Everything comes down to these questions. And if you tell an employer, if you can convince an employer the answer to these questions is yes, then you'll typically get the jobs you're applying for. And if two of them is yes, then you might get the job. And most attorneys never get all three answers as yes. And that's why it's very difficult to get positions, especially in the most competitive law firms. And these questions are really the most important thing that law firms are asking when they review your resume and they speak to you. Very few attorneys, by the way, understand these questions. And a lot of times people get very discouraged in their job search because they don't understand them. And if you're unemployed, you're probably unemployed right now because you're not answering these questions properly from the standpoint of employers. And understanding how to frame yourself is really the key to not just getting a job, but to staying employed in the first place. So the first question is, can you do the job? And this is really probably the most important. And lots of people out there can do the work that a job requires, but very few people can actually do the job. And many people will come to me all the time. They'll have experience that looks like they can do a job, but this doesn't really mean that they can do the job. And doing the job really means that you can fit in, that you're willing to play by the rules of the employer, that you have the background to work in the firm, and you're willing to do everything that the job requires. And if you think about these things, when doing the job just doesn't mean the idea that you have the background to do the work. It means that you're willing to fit in and play by the rules. And I've taken this statement and broken it down to three different things about, can you do the job? And many times I've said, you could be managed, or is another one, is number two, is the number one. But the big one really for a lot of employers is whether or not you can fit in. And I'll never forget it. It was not too long ago, and I was speaking with a very strong patent attorney who was unemployed, and she had a great background. There's a dearth of African-American patent attorneys, and she was an African-American patent attorney, and she was poor, from a poor urban background. She'd gone to a top engineering school and did very well there, and then also had gone to an Ivy League school. And when I was speaking to her on the phone, she was very, monotone and not connecting with me and not easy to speak with, and just giving me very flat answers and refusing to talk about herself, refusing to connect when I was trying to do that. And that's common with a lot of people with science and engineering backgrounds sometimes. It's not the most common, but usually you can get people to open up and laugh or stuff when you're talking to them because you want to bring out their personality, because you want to be able to sell the person fitting into a certain firm. And so that's important. And so this particular person, I said to her, I'm sensing some hostility. I'm not sure why. And I said, in order to represent you, you're going to be able to need to go to a law firm. You're going to need to be able to fit in and get along with people. And I personally can't do that. I can't, represent to them that you're going to be able to get along if you can't even get along with me. My job is I have an incentive to get along with you, and I really want to get along with you, but I'm not able to do that. And in response, she said, all the education skills to do the work. She said, that's all that matters. Your job is to speak with me and then forward the resume of the employer. That's it. And so the way she was coming at it was just because she'd had these degrees and experience, that she was qualified for the job, and her ability to connect with people and her ability to fit in different environments and so forth, which is a personality thing, by the way. It has nothing to do with all these other things that people bring into it, which could be male, female, different religions and backgrounds. It's really just whether or not your personality will click and you'll get along and people will like you. And this sort of attitude that just because you have a degree or just because you have experience is going to get you a job is not true. It's absolutely not true. If you don't have the right attitude and you're not connecting with people, then you're not going to get the job. They don't care. Having a degree is fine. When you're like 4 or 5 years out of school, no one's going to care about your degrees. They don't care, and they won't even care very much about where you work. Most of the jobs you'll get will be of people that that you relate to and connect with. And I was on a meeting with our recruiters the other day or yesterday, and I was thinking about recruiters that I've hired, and most of them have come through people that I know. They haven't, when I put jobs out, I might get sometimes, like most employers, and they'll get a lot of applications, sometimes hundreds or thousands for one job as a recruiter and our company. But the people that end up getting hired are people that are able to connect with me many times through other people and that sort of thing. So you need to be able to get along with people, and you need to be seen as someone that is going to connect, because when it comes down to it, it's your qualifications matter, but fitting in with the people that you're applying to is really important. And you fit in by many times being from the same location. That's a big time when you move home, of knowing the same people, that have good relationships with them, of all those sorts of things, of having had shared experience, of having worked for similar people, of having similar hobbies, and all those sorts of things make you fit in. It's not your race or your religion or your sex. It's your ability to many times fit in, is your ability to connect with people. And it's very important. And people hire people that they like, so they want to like you. They want to be able to get along with you and feel that you're going to have a positive working relationship with them. And then they also want people that are going to bring positive energy into the office and that are going to bring people up and not down. And so this woman that believed that her job was just to show up to the office and do the job and leave and not connect with people is a real killer, because when you're walking around an office or you're trying to work with someone who's dragging everyone down and not positive, it can really put a kibosh on everything and make it an unpleasant place to work and make people unhappy. And I'm sure you can relate to that in interpersonal situations where when your family, where maybe someone is very unpleasant, and so you avoid them and you don't want them at events and so forth. And it's like that when you're not connecting. And so people care about how you make them feel and whether or not they're comfortable with you. And your job search should not just be a question of getting a lot of resumes out there, which is very important, by the way. Your job search and your career should be about trying to be around people that you're comfortable with and make you feel good about yourself, and vice versa, because those are the sorts of people that are going to advance you and where you're going to be happy and that are going to protect you. And I've seen the lack of focus on this stop people in their careers and tracks time and time again. I have a sad story, but it's a guy that I knew when I was younger in my career. Actually, I never worked with him, but he worked for someone that I worked with. And he had some ups and downs, but he had 2 job offers. And one was with a firm that was perfect for him. It was with a bunch of people that had gone to were from a similar political party as he, that loved his political background. And this guy was a diehard in his career in terms of what he was doing. And he just had a very similar background. And he got a job with this firm, and it was a miracle. They hardly ever had hired anybody laterally in years. And the firm was in San Francisco. And it was a smaller firm with like maybe 30 or 40 attorneys, and most of them older. And they really liked him. They thought he had a future there and all sorts of things. And then he also got a job through his friend with a huge law firm in New York. And there was no connection with the big law firm. The only thing they offered was a lot of money. And he ended up taking the firm, even though this other firm really liked him and he would have done well there. He ended up taking the job in New York, had a horrible experience where he worked 7 days a week for a year before he quit, was burned out. And then he just had a tough time. I think he got a DUI and lost a job when it was in the papers, and has been, doing contract work for the remainder of his career. And the point is that if you wind up many times with the right people, it's a very good thing. And when you fit in with the right firms, it's a very good thing. And I've seen so many people make this mistake. I can't even begin to tell you. And employers choose people to work there many times that they believe will fit in. If you fit in, there's so many things that can make a difference in your career. But when you connect with someone and there's truly that connection, and it's a real connection with an employer, that's a big deal. And it's like that in your personal life. When you meet people that you feel like you have a real connection with, it's a big deal. Education and experience is not meaningless, but it's in terms of what's going to take you far. If you're not connecting, you're always going to get pushed out of organizations. You're never going to really amount to your potential. And getting along with others is very important. It doesn't mean you need to be social, like I said here, but you do need to be able to get along with others. And 100% for helping the underdog. When I was in college, I ran a business where I was in Detroit, and I was giving people kind of their first jobs out of a drug rehabilitation center, and really trying to help people's self-esteem and so forth. And it worked, but for most of the people. So I want to help people, but you can't help yourself, and you're not going to do well if you think that your job is just about doing the job and you can go home. If you're going to protect yourself, then you can't do that. And your education and skills will take you somewhere. They'll get you in the door when you're young. But even, people with good education and skills, I see people all the time that graduate from every top law school, whether it's every top 10 law school, that don't get jobs. They literally graduate and they don't get jobs, and they're unemployed for a year or two after graduating. And it's not because they don't have the right schools or they didn't get the right grades, because they go into interviews many times and they're unable to connect, and so you need to learn these skills, and you need to realize that people are not hiring you just because you can do the work. They're hiring you because you can fit in. It just doesn't work that way. And so this particular woman, I was really shocked that she was so hostile and viewed my role as the way she did. And I encounter versions of that, certainly from time to time, but when I told her that I certainly wasn't going to be able to help her because she just was so closed-mouthed and just not, going to connect with people. And then later on, I looked her up because I was wondering, why was this woman so upset? And she was mad. I guess she'd sued several people. She'd sued her former law firm and lost, and she'd filed a lawsuit against a hair salon because they served a white customer before her that actually had an appointment, and she didn't have an appointment. And so I realized that she was angry about something and would cause trouble. And so as much as I wanted to help her, I knew that wherever she went, she probably wouldn't be able to do the job. And so a lot of people have problems. And so not everybody fits in every environment. So you may not fit in because of your religion. You may not fit in because of your sexual orientation, your race. And in my case, I was always very curious and like to ask a lot of questions. And that certainly didn't work. And it wasn't the kind of attitude that was appropriate for all firms. A lot of firms expect you to sit down and work and be very serious. And that's not something that was that I was good at. And I was always interested in other things, like how business works and so forth. So instead of just sitting down and cranking out legal work, I was always interested in how these businesses we were working for were making money. And so and those are things that aren't good, that I was like. Sometimes I've observed that there are issues of people not necessarily getting along, and you can call it discrimination or whatever, but there's just different types of people that can get hired in different ways. And so many times certain people it's actually easier for them to get hired than others. And I think a lot of it has to do with your ability to fit in. And I believe that different groups and so forth can fit in different ways. And an example is I come from a background where I've been exposed to a lot of people that are in my family that practice Judaism. So you have people that are, and I'm personally not anybody that practices, but you have people that are very orthodox and separate that believe that they want to keep all the relationships with people that are also orthodox. People that aren't orthodox and so it depends on your belief and how many times you may want to, and how you can get along with different types of people. When you put yourself into a certain tribe, or you come up with a certain, belief about different ways that you the different things that can separate you from people. For example, people that in my family, the Orthodox Jews, for example, that's something that separates them. And you have to ask yourself, why do you want to be part of a group, or do you want to be not part of a group? And so many times you have to be able to come together and embrace the diversity of the groups you want to be with if you're going to be successful. So just remember that law firms are groups of people coming together for a common purpose. They don't want people there that they believe are going to make trouble. They want people who like them and respect them for the type of people that they are. And anytime you look like you're not going to fit in, they may have a problem with it. That doesn't mean that they're going to discriminate against you because you're diverse or not diverse or whatever, but that they want to be able to get along with people that they feel can be their friends, acquaintances, and others. And they want to get along with they want to hire people that they trust and they believe are going to have their back, and people that are not going to sue them and make trouble, and people that are going to want to participate in the social dynamic, and people that are not going to spread negative news about them and make trouble. They're businesses. Law firms are businesses. And so when I was in school, a lot of the stuff that I was taught was the businesses were bad and there were this about them and they were perpetuating the rich and all these sorts of things, and law firms were bad. And so I went into a lot of early interviews with those preconceptions, and law firms did the right thing by not hiring me. And so I'm just trying to show you that any beliefs that you may have about groups and so forth, and negativity and looking for trouble, if you think these things, you'll show them in interviews. And law firms want to hire people that they feel are going to be part of a group, that aren't going to ruffle their social dynamic and so forth. And that's just how it is. It's just something that you need to keep in mind. And fitting in is about a lot of different things. And honestly, this discussion kind of makes me uncomfortable just because there's so many hot buttons. But what I would say is that you have to understand kind of the groups that you're applying to. The guy that I talked about earlier that was very conservative and so forth and got a job with a conservative firm, those are people that would have protected him. And some law firms, for example, are composed of lots of conservatives. And you can imagine different parts of the country, the law firms will be composed of a lot of conservatives. Others are composed of a lot of liberals, and others are composed of lots of good-looking slim people, others of good-looking overweight people. There's just or bad-looking slim people, and you just never know. And some of one religion, and some primarily of women, and some of men. And the idea is that, and then even with the way they approach problems, there's certain law firms that will cut corners and they'll do things that without being very thorough, and there's other law firms that will. So regardless of what fitting in means, you need to find employers that value people like you. They need to value your way of thinking. They need to value your outlook on things. They need to value that. And the reason is because groups bring together people that are similar to them, and they tend to exclude people that are different. And so they may say they want to have a lot of diversity of different types of opinions and stuff, and many of them actually do. And most of them that are, especially in this day and age, are really trying to do that. But ultimately, everything is about a group, and it's about the type of people that those sorts of people that are in the firm are comfortable with and want to be around. And so that's just something to really think about. That's very important. And I'll answer questions about that in a minute, because I know this is a big topic now, but fitting in is hugely important. No matter who you are, you need to be able to fit in with the places that you're applying, the places you're trying to work, and realize that it goes way beyond your resume, because there's no dearth of people that have the resumes to do whatever job you're applying to. Okay, and then the next one is you can only do the job if you're willing to play by the rules of the employer. So the idea is that different employers have different games that they play. And by games, that means some may require you work incredible hours, and they may want the job to be your only reason for existing. And if you're interviewing with a firm like that, then they're going to basically be looking for reasons that they think you may not work really hard, and will eliminate you if they feel like you're not going to play by that game. And that's their game. And it's just something to worry about. Other employers don't want everybody playing like that. Some employers, I was talking to a patent firm in the Silicon Valley recently, and they were saying they don't want patent attorneys there that are going to try to bill over 1,500 or 1,600 hours a year, because they'll throw off their culture. And that's them. So that's the game. So if someone shows up at this firm and bills twice as much, that's certainly going to make the people that are billing half as much not look as good, and they're not going to be comfortable with that person. So the firms that are very demanding may not want to work with people that they believe are going to have kids. I'm just saying it. It's true. Firms that are very demanding won't like it if you look like a man that has a lot of outside interests, that spends a lot of time exercising and with hobbies and so forth. And if you seem headstrong and talk about how you're willing to work hard, but only if the compensation is right, those same firms may not be interested. And there's all sorts of rules. But basically, when I talk about playing by the rules of the employer, what that means is the employers are really asking if you can be controlled, and are you going to follow them and what they ask, and are you going to do the things that they require for the job. And those are really the three most kind of important things. And one of the most common sites in the legal world, and it's something that I see pretty much consistently, is young male attorneys that have gone to great law schools, done well, and received a lot of praise and so forth for all their accomplishments for most of their life. And these types of attorneys will go into law firms and they'll have very high expectations for themselves, and they'll believe that they need to be advanced immediately and so forth. And honestly, I speak with attorneys like this all the time because they believe that they need to really move on. And a lot of these tend to be young white men from top law schools. And a lot of them will leave declaring that there's not enough money and responsibility. And sometimes they'll say they want to do personal injury or mass torts. They'll believe that these cases must be easy because other people with lesser qualifications are doing them. And they'll come to me and basically expecting the doors of law firms to open to them because of their stated ambitions to be rich and powerful. And believe that whatever background they have makes them a catch. And many times when attorneys are in that point, they're in crisis because they really are not thinking through their careers, and they're really quite full of themselves, and it doesn't work. You can't really expect to reach heights of greatness without learning what you're doing. And many times when they find out the salaries are 1/3 of what they would make in a large law firm, they're not happy, or even 1/4. And those law firms hardly ever make them offers. And they'll say things in interviews like, I'm happy to work here, but I'm going to need significant responsibility, and I want to be paid commensurate with my contribution to each recovery. This is literally the kind of stuff that it's very common. And I see these examples like almost every year, several times a year. So this is an example of someone that can't do the job. And law firms have no interest in this. And the person that's going to be hired is someone who's going to put their head down, work hard, and doesn't have entitlement issues. Think about it, if you were an employer, would you rather hire someone that is going to be working hard and doing a good job, but making you pay them and undermine your other people by getting paid more and showing up everyone else that works there every step of the way? Or would you want to make sure that you hire the person that is very easy to get along with and so forth? And the attorney with a big background is not a good catch at all. And so that's many times what happens. And so you need to understand that just because you can do the job, even that you can do it very well, law firms are businesses. And one person that can do the job better than everyone else there sometimes could undermine the whole pack and put the whole business at risk. And law firms need people to play by the rules, and they can be managed. And this particular type of attorney typically will go someplace and then have to end up starting their own thing later on because there's just too much inability to play by the rules, which is very common. So the other question the law firms are asking is if your background is what the firm needs. And when an employer is looking at your resume, what they're looking to see is whether or not you have the skill, education, and so forth to do the work. And that just means, are you qualified? And whether or not you have the experience in the practice area and so forth. And if you have the experience, the odds are pretty good that you can do the job. And this particular thing is something that's just very common, and I see it all the time. It's one of the most easy to tell if someone's qualified to work in a certain law firm just by looking at their resume. You can pick that up fairly quickly. And I have a sense of it at this point in my career because I've been doing this for so long. But for the most part, being qualified for a job can mean different things to different employers. But you can be qualified to work in a neighborhood law office where you may be able to do a bunch of different things and give advice to people walking in off the street. But that's going to mean something different than being qualified to work in a major law firm. And law firms are looking at your previous experience, they're looking at the kind of work you've done, how long you've done it, and so forth in order to make judgments about your background. And some law firms won't look at people from certain law schools. Other law firms literally have grade cutoffs from certain schools. I know some firms, every single school in the country, they have a cutoff for. So you can get into this firm, but you may need to be first in your class if you went to certain law schools, or the top 5% in other ones and top 20% in other ones. So they have cutoffs, and other law firms only hire out of certain law firms. So that's something that we do at BCG. It's very interesting. We look at where do people go after being in a certain law firm, and many times you can see that there's certain law firms that will primarily hire from a few different types of law firms in that practice area, and other law firms may require certain types of experience. Most of this is fairly self-explanatory, and I'll answer questions about this because I see there's some questions. But the most important things really are, when an employer is hiring you, is what your previous employer was. They're interested in where you may have been a summer associate. They're also interested in the current firm you're at. And they typically will have had experiences with attorneys from certain firms and not other, and that are good, and so forth. And that's really how they tell whether or not you can do the job. And most law firms will hire from certain firms because they know that those firms work on similar sized clients. They hire similar types of attorneys and have certain types of standards. But regardless of what the job is, most law firms know that once you pass the bar and so forth, you're probably, and you're working in a given practice area, most jobs you can do. If you have decent training, you can do most jobs. I know an attorney that quit a job. He was a partner in a major law firm. And this next one, by the way, is called What Are You Willing to Do Whatever the Job Requires? And this particular reason for employers hiring people, are whether or not you can do the job, is because different employers are going to require different things out of you. And some of them may actually require you to be a little dishonest or bend the truth. Others may require you to be extremely honest and never bend the truth. Others may require you to deal with certain types of people and not bring certain types of clients in, and so forth. But I know an attorney that was a partner in a major law firm, and he quit to go to work with a major company. And in the first few weeks he was at work, he was given some papers to file with the SEC, and the documents weren't accurate, and he was being asked to file them because the company was trying to keep the stock price up and wanted him to do it. And when he spoke to some superiors, he was basically told that you had to do it and not to say anything. And so he went to see the CEO of the company, and he got fired. And it took him a couple of years to find a job. Now, I don't know if what he was doing was completely illegal. I think there was a reading that maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But at the same time, he lost his job, and it took him a few years to find a new one. And so that can be very risky many times, and you need to be careful. And I'm not saying that certainly anybody should break the law, but certain jobs will require you to do certain things and others won't. Some jobs will require you to work every weekend. Other jobs will require you to generate business immediately as an associate. Some jobs require a ton of travel. I've seen jobs where people literally spend all week traveling. Others may require you to go out to dinner with clients several times a week. Others may want you to go drinking with people in the firm frequently. And the point is, like, when an employer is evaluating you, many times they literally may be evaluating you, saying, is this the type of person that's going to go drinking with us? Or is this the type of person that's willing to get on a plane several days a week, and so forth? And you may not be, but they're constantly evaluating that. And another thing that I see that's very common is there's law firms that have some very difficult to get along with partners. And typically those partners are so difficult that what they'll do is they will often go outside and hire certain types of people to work with them. Instead of actually giving them to having their own associates work with them, they'll go out and they'll literally laterally hire associates to work with these notoriously demanding, difficult to get along with partners. So those people will stay at least for a year or two, so they don't want to be job hopping, and work with that person, and they'll pretty much only work with them. And this is how it works at some firms, and I've seen that happen before. And if the person's good and can stick around, then that's great, but many times they're not. So many people need to be very strong-willed to work with certain types of people. So that's how they evaluate, can you do the job? And I know that's a lot of information, but the next one that's very important that they ask is whether or not you want the job. And lots of people will apply to jobs that they don't want to do. And people may apply for jobs that they're very qualified, but don't want to do. For example, I see people all the time, or recruiters do, that call up, and as first-year salaries have been rising for decades, someone who's 20 years out of law school, many times, most attorneys that are 20 years out of law school are not making as much as attorneys working in top firms as first-year associates. or probably at least half of them. And so they'll call up and they'll say they're interested in going to work as first-year associates, or they'll take that salary, which is funny. And I'm not going to talk about why that wouldn't work, but the reason is that they know that someone with 20 years of experience isn't really going to want to, even if the money is good, do the first year grunt work and so forth and take orders from someone that's, I don't know, 15 years, younger than them and so forth. It's not going to work. Even though the person may say they want the job, they really don't. And there's all sorts of people that act they want the job, but they really don't. And there's all sorts of things on your resume when an employer is evaluating you that will give them the indication of whether or not you want a job. Some things could be having taken an extended time off. If you've done that, then in many cases, the law firm assumes that working isn't that important to you, or other things are, and you'll leave again. If you've gone in-house many times, they won't like that. Sometimes going to work for the government, not always, but many times in a clerkship and so forth is fine. But many times having gone to work for the government is something that suggests you may not be able to do the job. Lots of moves on your resume also suggests you may not want the job, because if you're consistently moving, that's a sign. And so there's just all sorts of things. And really when a law firm sees something on your resume that shows an interest and commitment to the subject matter and work that they're already doing, then that's great. One of the most common examples is patent attorneys typically are very easy to place, because a lot of times they've been engineers before they went to law school, and then they've done nothing but patent law. And so everything shows that they want to do the job. And if they have a lot of employment stability, that's even better. People that are in healthcare a lot of times are very good, because they may have been in the healthcare industry before going to law school, and they may have been nurses or worked in hospitals and so forth. And so a history of doing something in that practice area is useful. Also, attorneys with a lot of business typically are people that want the job, and because they're interested in the subject matter. When you have things in your resume that show you do a lot of writing, speaking, and in your subject matter, that's also very appealing to law firms. And they know about if you have a good reputation. And someone that really wants the job, you can tell based on their resume very quickly that they have a history of doing something and they're motivated in a certain direction. But also, they'll typically act much differently in interviews. They won't act like the woman that I told you about earlier that was flat. They'll be enthusiastic. They'll dress up for the interview. I interview people now by Zoom quite a bit, and certain people will show up and they will be dressed up, and they'll be sitting in their dorm room or something, and they have a tie and they're all ready to go and so forth, and they'll look and act the part of someone that wants it. And if you want a job, you're going to be doing a lot of research. So a lot of times people will say, oh, the market's bad, and so forth. And you need to be aggressively doing what you can to apply to as many jobs as you can and as many markets if you're looking for a job. That's a sign you want the job, you want to work. You'll prepare for interviews and say the right things. And interviews are a test about how much you want the job. If you go in and don't give 100% and don't convince the employer that you really want this job and you want to be there for some reason, then someone else is going to do that. And this is a place where a lot of people slip up. You may be going into interviews and not getting all the jobs you want. And it's possible that the reason is because you really don't want it. Attorneys often slip up and when they're able to convince the employer. Sometimes people will go into interviews and they'll say inappropriate things, or they'll do things, and really they may be sabotaging themselves on purpose, or they may get sick before interviews, or miss planes, or not show up in time, or get the time wrong. And these are examples of people many times that don't really want jobs, and that's something to keep in mind. And one of the most things that employers really don't like, and it's something that hurts us as a recruiting firm when it happens, but they don't like it when they extend offers to people and then those people turn them down. Most employers want to believe that you're their first choice, and because it's embarrassing for an employer when you don't choose them. If they themselves out and we like you to be part of our group, no, it makes them look bad. So they will hire people many times that aren't as qualified but seem like they really want to work there as opposed to others. And that happens all the time. I noticed early in my career, the best and desirable candidates would approach me for special help because many times they weren't getting interviews. And I would I had a really good candidate once, and he was just phenomenal. He was, I don't know, was the very top of his class at Harvard, and he was in the right practice area, and he was to a market that was very busy, and he wasn't getting interviews. It didn't make any sense to me, and and I didn't know what was going on. Why was this person? And it was early in my career. Why wasn't he getting interviews? And then lesser people that just qualified without the coming from the same quality firms there was a feeding frenzy, and he's getting 10, 12 interviews, and this person wasn't getting interviews. So you may ask yourself, why the difference? And the problem is that particular attorney was at such a good firm and had such good qualification that law firms were nervous. They were nervous about him in because they didn't think they want to work. They were interviewing lesser qualified attorneys than the more qualified attorneys. And so I had to go and convince these firms that he was their first choice, and were among their first choices, and why he was applying and what he liked about them and so forth. And it's that he wanted to work for them. And so law firms need to believe that you really want to work there, especially if you have good qualifications. And if that's going to hurt you. And the final one of the three is you'll do the job long term. And it because I see all these people from Yale Law School, and Yale's a great school, obviously, and it's certainly a great school. But many of the attorneys from there receive a very cold reception in the legal market, and they're very smart people, and people very well. There's been presidents and leaders of huge companies, leaders of all sorts of academic institutions. But one of the things that this is, most people that go to school, they're necessarily thinking that they firm. They don't necessarily be a partner in a big law firm or practice law for their whole. Much interested in doing other things, and this may be politics, it might be writing. I mean, many are interested in working in a large law. What happens is a lot of times they'll go to a firm and they'll be there for a year or two, and then they'll do something else, and so they're never really committed to work. Now, that's certainly not every graduate of Yale Law School, and it's not probably even, I don't know, it's not probably, but it's a lot of them. And they tend to be interested in doing a lot of other things other than practicing law. So if they're going to work in a law firm right out of law school, many times, a year or two, they're in the government. Many times they go in the government and then they come to a law firm too, and then a year or two later, they're in us or something. This is what I've noticed. And I've, seen thousands of people from there. And that's just kind of what I see. And the problem is that firms will not hire them that have had this experience because they don't believe that people will do the job long term. Every employer, whether or not you believe it or not, really does want to hire people who want to be there for their whole careers. And they may expect you to leave after not making partner, but they would like it if you would be bringing in the business and helping grow and doing the for their rise. So they want people who want to stay there, and they believe that there's stuff in your background that suggests you're not there for your whole career. They're going to be very nervous about giving you the job, and it's for employers to hire people that aren't going to stick around. If you're moving to have any connections, they're nervous. They're going to think, why is this person going to stick around? But if you're moving, then they will believe that you around and settle down. If you house and family in where you live, and they're interviewing you, you'll stick around. There's also a resume that will give them that indication. But if there's anything on your resume that an indication that you might do something like this law or not stick around, then they're not going to be interested in you. For example, in New York, which is funny, that are looking for jobs many times, and so they'll have that they were admitted to the New York bar such and such a date, and then a couple years later it'll show they were admitted to the California bar, but they've never not worked in New York. So if a New York law firm is looking at that, why did you take the California bar? And the person will say, well, I thought about maybe working in California at some point, and that would be a good reason to eliminate because you wouldn't stick around. And so any time an employer thinks you may one day do something else, maybe as interesting as they might have. Many times, if you come from a very privileged background, they may believe that you're not going to do the job long term. And believe, why would you stick around and tolerate when you don't have to? If you look like someone that may leave to raise a family, that may be between jobs frequently. That's obviously, and there's people that leave firms every year, and you can get away with that for a year or two, once or twice. But if you're leaving moving around a lot, that's just not, it's going to hurt you. That have outside interests that look like they could be all consuming, often don't look like they're going to. Sometimes people have hobbies and really like that could be a passion, and law firms don't like. This area is a sign that you probably won't want to do the job. If you've before to go teach or go in house or do something like that, it's a sign that you're probably not going to do the job long term. And like earlier, extended time off thing. Many times there's a lot of age discrimination. So if you're in a second career, and I'm not saying this is an intention, but if you've had positions before, when you're on a second career where you had a lot of responsibility, it may be difficult for you to suddenly taking orders and starting from the ground, and you may not stick around. Many times attorneys are hired when the economy is bad. They may be hired by firms that need, but the person could work at a better firm. The economy was better. And even if you have great qualifications, sometimes it'd be hard for you to get hired at firms that aren't even your qualifications. And then sometimes if you're in an industry where they believe you may be from, if you fired from your employers. So one thing that happens is people fired, I've noticed, their next job be very angry sometimes, or they believe they need to protect themselves from getting fired again. And so many times they will fire their next employer and the next employer. That's just a rule. And for that reason, a lot of times employers will avoid them. And it's not to say that getting fired is the end of the world. It just depends on how the person takes it. But a lot of people don't take it the right way. And if you can make more money with a different employer, you may not stick around. And sometimes people have personality problems and things, and it indicate they may not last. And so the other thing is that there's a large preference for law for people that they know and may be committed to working for them and unlikely to go elsewhere. And like I told you earlier, like a lot of the hires that I've done have been through people that knew people that work for me and that I trusted. That's another thing. And then if you're in an area and you have a house and you seem like you have a family in an area, then they're also likely to keep you around. And just remember that law firms are very risk averse, and they don't want to hire people that are going to be there for the short term. They want to hire people that are going to be committed, because turnover is bad for them. It's bad when there's turnover and people are leaving. It's bad because that undermines people there. It's not good for their clients. And so they really want to hire people that are going to stick around. So these 3 questions are very important, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you guys have about them, but you really do need to think about them in your search. And there's an article that I've done around this topic, and I would review it, but these are really the reasons people don't get hired. And so when I see people go into interviews and not get jobs, or I see people not getting resumes, not getting interviews, it's generally because they're answering these questions improperly in the employer's mind. So I'm going to take a quick break, and I will be back in about 1 to 2 minutes, and then I will take as many questions as people have. Thanks. Questions. My favorite part of the week is answering questions. Let me see here. 1 second. Perfect. I'm glad we got a lot of questions today, so that's good. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to open I'm going to stop the screen share for a second. 1 second here. Just opening a blank document here. One thing I wanted to show everybody too, just real quickly, is I try to, when I look at resumes and cover letters, I always look at this. And most people's resumes and cover letters, if you try to run them through one of these programs, whether it's Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid, you'll always catch a lot of errors, like in terms of spacing and sometimes grammar and things. And it's just a good idea to get in the habit of doing that, because when you use this, it'll show errors. And I'm almost yet to see a resume of any caliber of attorney that doesn't have lots of errors and so forth in it. Okay, so I'm going to start with some questions here, and I'm just choosing them randomly, but I will get to everyone's questions, and there's a lot of good questions today. Give me 1 second. And just remember, you guys can ask, everyone can ask questions anonymously. Okay. As part of getting good at big law, learning how to be okay with Medicare work, meaning, do you to a degree have the lawyer standards for the work product you produce in order to become more efficient, better able to handle a higher amount of work? So that's a good question. The answer to that is no. You have to, a lot of times the people actually work harder at big law because the quality of work has to be much higher. And that means that you have to think through the issues in a lot more depth. And the difference between like big law and let's call it small law and regular law is I was actually talking about this with our recruiters in a meeting yesterday. But in big law, you have large clients with large budgets that expect top quality legal work and are willing to pay for it. So what that means is it means more research, more thoroughness, more time, and all that sort of stuff goes into the work. And when you're in a smaller firm, there's typically smaller clients with small budgets that want work done quickly or at a low cost, and they're price sensitive. So just imagine that you were negotiating a contract to do something, just you personally, whoever asked this question, and you needed to get something done, and you had two options. One is you could hire a big firm. The other is you could hire a small firm, and you had to basically do. If you hire a big firm, the big firm may charge you. You don't know. They may charge you $100,000. You'll pay whatever that big firm charges. Whereas if you go to a small firm, the small firm is probably not going to charge you more than a few $1,000s. And so large clients that have a lot of money will go to big firms, and the big firms will research everything, and their objective is to be right and to do the work as well as best as it can be done. At smaller law firms, their objective really is to get the work done in a price sensitive way. So you need to understand that the quality of work that a smaller firm does many times is not going to be, it may be as good, but it usually is not going to be as good as a big law because the large law firms can afford to be thorough. The other thing that's important to understand is that what happens in terms of how clients view the work. So a lot of times a client will look at the work product of a big law firm, and the client literally will have no idea what the person's talking about. So the general counsel may be reading, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but the general counsel will read the work, and when they read the work, they're basically looking for small errors and things like that to get a discount. So small errors meaning typos, etc., and so forth. Stuff that really doesn't come across, it's not really that important. But the idea is because they don't always understand what they're reading. If you're a general counsel, you may be reading 50 different things about the law. They may find a small error and make a huge deal out of it because the thought is that if small errors are being made in terms of the work product, then what's happening what about the thinking process? So what about the thinking process? Meaning, if you can't reasonably be expected to write a document without a lot of typos in it or any typos, what's going on with your thinking process in terms of the conclusions you're reaching about the law? And that's how people think if they see a lot of errors in your work. And this is something that a lot of young attorneys screw up on. So they may be very smart and able to reach good conclusions, but if you're making a lot of errors, a lot of times they'll think about the thinking process. And then small firms aren't as concerned about that. And so a lot of times the work that comes out of small firms will have a lot of errors in it. And that's not to say that they're all like that, because some are extremely high quality and there's some very good boutiques. But for the most part, the more money people are spending, the more quality of work. So you can't say things ever really about, you can't ever think you can dumb down your work. The work in a large law firm, often the same type of work will take much, much longer than it will take in a smaller law firm, because you're expected to do really good work. Okay, in interviews, I've spoken with law firms who will say things like, if you work here with people who do busy work for you, so you can focus on more important stuff. I've also heard we value work-life balance here. I understand that these things are often said to entice attorneys, nor are these things I expect, but at the same time, are these law firms trying to bait me into saying something dumb? Yeah, so I would assume that wherever you work, you will have to do busy work, regardless of what level you're at. There's partners in major law firms that spend their days doing a lot of busy work many times. So the busy work stuff is just something that goes with the territory. The second you start acting like you're too good to do busy work in a lot of law firms, the law firm will get rid of you or won't advance you. You should just do the busy work and not complain. And it's pretty much like that at all levels. I'm not trying to be rude here, but people that complain about doing busy work and so forth, it tends to get in trouble. And that's an ego-centered emotion worrying about busy work and you're worrying about yourself and so forth. Now, there's obviously some limits to that, but I saw an attorney once get fired for refusing to do busy work. And what had happened is, it's a long story and I've told it before, but he had found out by a law firm that he hadn't made partner, and he thought he was going to make partner. And the next day, a partner that he knew didn't like him and probably had blocked him stopped by his office and asked him to do some busy work. And he said, I really don't have time for this right now. I'm a little upset about what happened. Can I not do this right now? And the partner didn't say anything. And then 15 minutes later, he came back and he had in one hand a check and a settlement agreement. He said, you can take this check and an agreement right now and leave, or you can just be fired. And so he fired him for not doing busy work. So you need to be very careful about complaining about busy work and so forth. You should just, especially if you're a young attorney, even if you're a mid-level, you should, the idea is you want to be happy about having access to work is the most important thing for any attorney. So meaning just having stuff to do. Attorneys don't have work to do, go crazy. Having anything to do that's billable is a blessing, because a lot of attorneys don't have it. Even if you may not like the fact that you have busy work, having stuff to do is a blessing. If you do a very good job of busy work, the odds are you'll get real work in the future. The other statement, we value work-life balance here, that some firms really do value work-life balance, and they really do mean it. And law firms that value work-life balance, if that's the case, then that's great. But the problem with work-life balance is that law firms are businesses, and they want to make money. And if a big client walks in and has a lot of work, that they will do the work, and they want to make money. So firms want to make money. And most firms are comprised of people that will not turn down opportunities to make money. The other problem is that you cannot control what happens, meaning you can't control what happens to clients. And so the problem with what happens to clients is clients get into emergencies. So they may have issues with, like, maybe getting ready to sell themselves. A client may be in danger of being taken over by another company. A client may have important papers that need to be filed. And so you can't control that. This is the nature of being a professional, is that you're responsible for this. And I was actually arguing with a reporter that was writing a hit piece about me, saying that I didn't believe about work-life balance. And how can you possibly, if someone accused you of a crime and you were going risk of losing your liberty and going to jail and so forth, and your attorney had to work long hours, and that's just the nature of the job. And so it's no different than being a doctor or something. Many times clients get in trouble. Now, there's some areas of law where that's not a big issue, like trust in the states and ERISA and some tax law and so forth, and you can go into those things. But anytime an employer is talking about work-life balance, you need to be careful. And I would say, to some extent, if people talk about not needing to do busy work, the worst answer would be something this, well, gosh, I hope not, because that's something I was worried about. Or I'm glad you said that, because I'm really looking for a firm that has work-life balance. My opinion would be, if law firms bring something like that up, the smartest thing you can do is really just not say anything and smile. Okay, let me just see here. Okay, these are great questions. I love these questions. It's really good questions today. Okay, so I'm thinking about trying to make a leap from an AmLaw 200 insurance defense specialty group within the firm to big law. Okay, can you share with me the kind of work difference I might experience? Example, should I work longer hours, even though my current firm expects 2,000 hours a year, crazier schedule, more things you can bill for, and therefore longer hours? Okay, so this is a good question. It's very similar to the question that I did earlier, but the difference between insurance defense and, I don't know what the specialty group is, and big law is that insurance companies typically, like if anybody here that's doing any type of insurance work, it depends on the firm, the insurance, but insurance companies have lots of litigation, or lots of work, is a better way to put it. And so they typically will hire firms to do work at the lowest possible cost, to extend litigation, many times just to extend litigation with the idea that they'll have to eventually pay a claim. And this is something to just entertain people that are, but in defense is always, in litigation, they call defense is delay. And the reason is that the longer you delay and the more expensive you make things for plaintiff, the longer the case will go on. And the better settlement, the more money you'll eventually get, or the more money you'll save. This is just something that they talk about with defense. But anyway, so insurance, if you're doing a lot of work for insurance companies, the problem is that that because they're doing it at the lowest possible cost, the quality of work that they do isn't always that high. Now, it depends on the type of insurance company that you're working for and the type of insurance work you're doing. But their job really is just to keep cases going as long as they can. And many times by not necessarily doing the best quality work, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, but a lot of times it tends to be very high volume. And in that high volume, and because of the money that the insurance companies are paying, there's some trade-off in terms of the quality. Now, when things get to big law, what happens at big law is trying to do very high quality work, and their expectations about what's acceptable to leave the firm is going to be much different, and the level of research and so forth. And most big law companies, most big law firms are representing clients that are very not as price sensitive, so they can afford to do very good work. And then those firms will also have very high standards about the type of work that enters. So it doesn't mean you'll have to work longer hours, but it means that they'll expect your work to be better and the quality of your work. So doing the same work typically may take a lot more time. So I remember when I was practicing, even if I was writing a memo, maybe it would take me three or 4 days to research and write the memo. But after writing the memo, I would always make sure that I spent at least a day or a day and a half proofing it, double checking it, and that sort of thing, just to make sure the quality was really good. It's the same thing with everything. The big law firms typically will have a lot of interest in that. Okay, so let's see here. I do an insurance defense firm. Insurance defense firms probably many times won't even ask you to write a memo. They'll just ask you to do the case. Okay, and just a quick story about insurance defense. I don't want to go too far into it, but when I was practicing law, there had been a big recession sometime in the 90s, I don't remember, and one of the attorneys I was working with had gotten an offer at Morrison & Foerster and been a summer associate there. And then there'd been this recession, and like many firms, Morrison & Foerster was trying to not have as large of a first-year class. So one day he opened his mailbox and there was a check in there saying, here's, you have the option of cashing this check and not starting with your class, or you can start and hope that there's work or something. So he cashed the check, and the first job he got, only job he was able to get, was an insurance defense firm. And his first day in the office, he'd never been trained in litigation or anything. Someone rolled in on these kind of mail carts, 200 cases, and said, these are your cases. Let me know if you have any questions. And so he was given 200 cases with no experience. And that's just how, I'm sure there were people that could answer questions for him, but that's just how a lot of the work works. Now, if he'd started in Morrison & Foerster, he would have been given, probably never, even signed a pleading for a couple of years, or certainly never been to court, or been responsible for all this stuff that you can think of. So larger law firms are typically much more thorough. Okay, I have a lot of public interest experience in my resume from before law school. Unfortunately, this has drawn some skepticism from law firms that I'm interviewing because otherwise qualified because of my school and grades. How can I best address the question of when to look in when to work resume in the firms? Okay, this goes back to the question of, will you do the job long term, and can you do the job? All this public interest experience, the problem is, and this is something, by the way, there's nothing wrong with having public interest experience, but in my opinion, you might be better off taking a lot of that off. And I don't know how much detail you need to go into it with, but yeah, a lot of times people are going to believe that's what you're going to want to do. And so where is your law firm? Where is your private experience and so forth? And are you more motivated by certain causes as opposed to public interest? And I personally don't think there's anything wrong with it, but you have to understand the firm's point of view. The firm's worried that you may not do the job long term. They're worried that you won't stick around, and that you may not be able to do the job, and all those sorts of things. And what happens a lot of times when people do have that type of experience is it colors the lens that you view the world through. If you work for an organization that has a certain view of the world, and you may come into a private law firm and transmit that view, and it could be that, I don't know, whatever it is, and that may not be something that's good for their clients. When I see resumes like that, I typically try to dumb down the experience and not go into a lot of detail. A lot of times people with public interest experience will talk with a lot of pride and so forth about what they did, and nothing scares employers more than that. So I would be, depending on what you're talking about, because they'll see what your real interest is. I see resumes all the time, by the way, from attorneys in big markets like New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, where they'll have a great law school and they'll have great firms. And then when they list their experience, for some reason, they put in all this information, sometimes before they actually are talking about their real experience, about their pro bono experience. So they'll say, I worked at this giant firm, and then they'll talk about their pro bono experience for 4 or 5 lines. And then they'll say, also worked in mergers and acquisitions group or something. It's as if that doesn't matter. When you talk about, that shows where the person's head's at. And even if they have really good backgrounds, many times those kind of people don't get jobs, which is unfortunate, because they're putting themselves in a position where they look like they may not want to actually do the position. So I would dumb it down to the extent you have public interest experience. And many times you don't even need to list it. Most attorneys that go to law school don't even have any work experience. So why would you have all this public interest experience on your resume? It's not something, that you really need to make a big deal out of. Okay. I recently received a summer associate position offer from at a Vault 100 firm. Great. I've gone through all the onboarding and just received word that something came up in my background check. Eventually, a few years ago, someone filed a protective order against me, harassment. I didn't know this person. The case came up with no identifiers and was dismissed by the judge. I'm freaking out a bit because this was my only offer and I never knew about this thing being filed or whatever. I told the firm I didn't know about it, and the onboarding person said they were sending it to counsel to make sure everything was okay. Should I be more concerned about it will cause them to rescind the offer? No, it sounds like it was a mistake. Anybody can file a request for a restraining order. I shouldn't even say this publicly, but I once owned a building and the people refused to close the door in the middle of the summer. And I walked into the building and told them to close the door. It was a furniture store on the ground floor, and it was the middle of the summer because it was costing a lot of money to keep the door open. Those people threatened to file one against me. And an attorney said anybody that wants to can file one and have it granted. Just because someone filed something against you, and I wasn't even screaming, I just was talking in the tone of voice I'm talking right now. So people use restraining orders and things against people. So I don't think you're going to have any issues, but I would look into, there's probably some sort of form or something you can file with the court to get that removed. And I don't know why someone would do that, but you should probably have a pretty good explanation about what may have happened. And maybe it was a mistake and a different name, but I don't think I would worry too much about that at all. Okay, let me see here. Okay, I'm a 2019 grad, non-target school, upper half, concentrating on business and corporate law. Now I'm here doing this. I realize I dislike it. I prefer to go public service, particularly I want to become a public defender. I know this is for law firms, but how does one demonstrate a commitment to public service? I've been working and learning, getting on the opposite track. I would like to get a public defender job. So that's great. So I do not think that public defender jobs, the thing I like about getting a public defender jobs, and you ask how you do it, is I would just basically write different public defenders offices and tell them that's something you want to do. And I am amazed at how many public defender offices there are around the country. Let me just see if I can do this. I don't know. But there's an incredible amount of public defender offices. Every city practically has one. So all you need to do is just do research online for a list of public defender offices and different locations where you want to work, and then contact them. I don't think you will have too much trouble finding one because there's a real demand for public defenders. And that's what how I would try doing it. Now, if you're doing corporate and business law, that is going to be a little bit of a stretch to get into that because litigation is much different than doing corporate and business law. But there's so many places and such a demand for public defenders all over the country that I don't think you'll have too much trouble doing it. But what you do need to do is research all the positions in different markets. And let me just see if I can do something here real quickly. One second. Here we go. So the way I would find public defender jobs, by the way, I would just go list of public defender offices. Here, list of public defenders in Los Angeles that just came up. So these are, but this public defender offices, and let's just do New Mexico, for example. So you can find typically this is a federal public defender, and then you could do a list of state public defender. offices. These are different lists of them, and there's lots of them. These are just some here, but there's always going to be just trying different searches like this is useful. On this city public defender offices, even, I mean, maybe there's city public defender. I don't know how New Mexico legal system works, but this is more of them. You should be able to find plenty of jobs this way. And this is something we do, by the way, for on Law Crossing. We go and we find different jobs like this and all the public defender offices. So this is, I just found this particular, I just did this search here and I found all of these public defender offices, which is crazy. It took me just a minute. And these are, it looks like federal public defenders. Actually, some of these, no, these are all federal public defenders. So you can find jobs fairly easily by doing searches like this, just typing in terms like public defender and so forth. And typically they're not going to be like on Indeed, or they'll be, we have them on Law Crossing, or you can find them different ways. But that's how I would do it. And you can see how many jobs there are. It's absolutely insane. There's tons of them. And that search right now, I just took me 30 seconds. And if I were to do more of those types of searches, I could find it even more. Okay, let me see here. So I'll just put this down here for you, that link. Oh, that's not the one I did, but that was just an example of how to find a link for that. Okay, let's see. Another question. Okay, you talk about government may indicate, you talk about working for the government may indicate you may not want to do that job. So do you feel this true for active military service and attorneys? Is your interest change the person served in the military? Okay, no, for a law firm, that's a good point, for the working for the military for 20 years. But yeah, if people, a lot of times what people will do, and this is, I apologize if I wasn't clear. A lot of times people will do things like this particular person right here that worked in a law firm and then decided they want to go into the government. So a lot of times what happens is someone will work in a law firm, then they'll go to the government, and then they'll realize that they want to go back to the law firm. And for a law firm, it's a bad risk, because this particular person right here that we were talking about it just a minute ago will probably, if they go back to a law firm, will probably be unhappy again. So there's a saying in that this billionaire once had, and he was in Los Angeles, and he had this list of sayings, like 25 that he believed made him successful. And one of his sayings was never rehire anyone. And what that means is if someone leaves your company or your law firm and wants to come back, the odds are that they're going to be unhappy again and leave. If someone leaves a law firm to do something else, and because they're unhappy, like this person says, I dislike it, and wants to come back, then the odds are they're going to be happy again. So if you've been in a law firm and you go into the government, or you've done something else and you go into the government, it's just a bad risk for a law firm to rehire you. And if you were an employer thinking about running a business, you probably would think it was too. And so that's my only statement. If you've been in the military for 20 years and then gone to a law school and want to work in the law firm, that's great. And so I don't see anything wrong with that. But these are great questions. I love these questions today. This is just awesome. Okay, how can I stop myself from being bitter over a difficult job search? I know what you're trying to hear is that there is rhyme and reasons why law firms choose one candidate over another, but sometimes it's very frustrating to see candidates who talk openly about how they want to leave for going in-house or whatever, and I'm seemingly able to convince law firms of my genuine desire to work and stay at a law firm. Okay, that's a good point. So the only way to stop yourself from becoming bitter is to, sometimes you have to think about why you're not getting jobs. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. And I don't want to get too much into them, but because I don't know why you're not getting jobs, but there's probably a lot of reasons why you're not getting jobs. And so those reasons, by the way, in the future, like nothing, it doesn't really matter why you weren't getting jobs now, because you're just learning and you're taking all of this that's happening to you and you're learning. I like that it's frustrating, because you should use that frustration almost as rocket fuel to learn about what you need to do to get better. There's a lot of schools of thought, but one of the ways to think about things is you can look at modeling. And modeling means, what are people doing that are getting jobs? And so what are people doing that are getting jobs? And so you can ask, and I don't know what they're doing. They may be doing something differently. What is it about them? Do they come across as more enthusiastic? Do they come across as more polished? Do they come across as better grades? What are they doing differently than you? and they may be doing something differently. They may have better grades, or they may be, I don't know what they're doing, but they may be more polished. They may be not as much visible ego. I don't know what they're doing. And I don't mean any of these as insults, because they certainly are not meant to be insults, because I don't know you. So these are just some things that may be happening. But you should always look at people that are succeeding and seeing what they're doing that's succeeding. I brought this up on a webinar a few weeks ago, but when I was in law school, I had my own business, and I was very outgoing, and I'd been presidents of different organizations in college and then in law school, and done all this stuff. And yet I wasn't getting all the jobs I wanted. And I remember when someone got a job in my first choice firm, that person was just very kind of dull. They were and not exciting. And I don't even think they had as good a grades as I had by any stretch of the imagination. But they got a job in my first choice firm. And I saw a couple people get jobs like that in firms that I really wanted to work in that didn't seem as exciting. And that was the thing, is like law firms are hiring the people that they think are going to do the job long term. Like I wasn't someone that's exciting, and trying to run businesses and stuff is not the kind of person that if I was a law firm I would hire, because they don't look like they're going to do the job long term. So even though I could certainly do the job, would I fit in with a bunch of people that are putting their heads down and trying to work in a law firm, and that's going to be no. So I had to change, and I did change. I did a clerkship, and then I had a summer associate job, and I learned what I needed to do, and I changed my resume around. I became and started looking like a different person, and that's what you need to do. So it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong, but you need to look very closely at why other people are getting jobs and you're not. Now, it could turn out that maybe you're not a good fit for a law firm. Many people that become professors and I bet half the professors at Harvard Law School and law school couldn't get jobs in law firms. It's just something to think about, because that's not what they're cut out for. They're academics, and they have different skill sets. Many people that have done very important things and that are attorneys could never get a job in a law firm. I don't think Barack Obama would have lasted very long in a law firm. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with him. He's just not cut out for it. And I don't think he ever did work in a law firm. I think he did a summer associate job, and who knows if he got an offer now. I'm sure he did. But the point is that different people are cut out for different things. And if you're not getting jobs, you want to look and say, who are getting the jobs? What are they doing differently than I am? And that's what I did. And I discovered that it was less about me and more about looking like I was a worker bee, and really de-emphasizing all the stuff that I had done to look like this great leader and stuff. I didn't have to look that way. And that was hurting me. So those are some things that I would recommend in terms of how you think about your search. And if you have any follow-up questions, that's a great question, because I know it's difficult. But the other thing I always recommend, and because there's so many human elements to people not getting jobs, that all you need to do is connect with one firm. And many times, I mean, that can make a huge difference. All you have to do is connect with one firm, and connecting with that firm can get you a job. So I always recommend to apply to as many places as possible, and give yourself as many options as possible. So that means applying to firms in your hometown, applying to firms on campus, sending applications on your own. So when I was in law school, what I did is I made sure that I applied to firms. I'm from Detroit, so I applied to, these firms didn't come to my law school, which is University of Virginia. So I applied to all the firms in Detroit. I did on-campus interviewing, which is how I got the job I took, interviewing. And then I also sent out applications around the country to firms that I wanted to work at. So I did all three. And then I also applied to government positions too that I was interested in. So you want to be very thorough. You don't want to just trust, and I don't have anything against on-campus, because on-campus interviewing is very good, but you don't want to, the problem is if that's all you rely on, that can hurt you. And so you need to, and you should always apply to firms in your hometown if you're in law school and you're going away. And then you should also apply to government positions too, if that's something you can think of doing, or other types of positions. Okay, is it a bad idea to call the HR of a law firm before sending a formal application just to introduce myself? No, not necessarily. They're probably not going to remember it, but But you certainly can call them. Sometimes you can ask them, are you the person I address the application to, and so forth. But in general, a lot of times they're overwhelmed with applications, so that may not be something that you necessarily want to do, but it's up to you. But you can call the HR director. If you can make a connection with them, that's also always a good thing. And you can tell them if there's some sort of connection you have to the firm, like you're from the area, you've always wanted to work there, you do this practice here, you're a follower of some attorney in the firm, and you bring that to their attention, then they're going to like that. So anything that makes them feel good about where they work or can make a connection. But you need, if you're going to call, you should have a reason why. So the reason why, by the way, is a very important thing. So when people hire people, they always like to say a reason why. When people interview people, they like to say a reason why. So it could be just something as simple as I went to school with such, I don't know, but you want to give some reason why you're applying to the firm and hope that they'll remember it. And then you put that right at the beginning of your cover letter. And I was going to, real briefly, I just did want to talk about something with a reason why. There's a book by Robert Cialdini, who's a professor at, University of Arizona or something, and he talks about, and it's called influence. And there's a famous study where people are cutting in line to use a Xerox copier. And when people say, I'm just cutting in line, can I cut in line? Most of the time people will say no, but if they say, I'm cutting in line, and they just give any reason, the reason could be because I'm late for class or because I'm hungry or who knows, any just stupid reason, then the compliance and people typically will let them cut. I don't know, it was like 80-90% of the time as opposed to almost hardly at all. And so the point is that when you give a reason why I'm applying to the firm because of this, I'm applying because of this, then that gives the person a reason also to potentially forward your resume and have you speak to the right people. And that's just a point that I would recommend. Okay. And these are great questions today. I love all these questions. I'm actually amazed. There's so many of them. This is great. Two of the most frequently encountered interview questions are, what is your greatest strength and what is your greatest weakness? As most character traits can be cast as both strengths and weaknesses, it is advisable to present the same strength in both in a single interview. For example, determination, stubbornness, attention to detail, excessive. Yeah, that's a good question. When people ask that question many times, I honestly do not know how seriously they take it. These kind of questions are behavioral type questions. I would read about them online and what people are asking. I've written articles about this, but typically when you talk about your greatest strength, you want it many times to be something that you've already talked about in the interview by the time they ask it. And then when you talk about your weakness, something like that. But you want to also, so you may want to say, and you can definitely say determination, stubbornness are weaknesses and so forth as well. Something that connects with a person many times. Like an example might be, what is your greatest strength? And you could say it's loyalty. Like I'm very loyal to employers and people, and I stick with them even though when I probably shouldn't. And I think that's a strength, and I've gotten a lot out of it, but it's also a weakness. And that's an example of loyalty, or attention to details, another one. So many times you can cast them both, but if you could do two as well, I don't know that it matters. Okay. This is another good question. These are great questions. I just can't believe how good these questions are. This is like honestly some of the best questions I've heard in a long time. Does the ranking of your school matter when it comes to in-house positions for business? I got accepted to a school that has a dedicated transactional law program, but it's not a high-tiered school. So it depends on the business. So most business people out there don't understand the rankings of law schools. So if you were to drive through a typical American town somewhere outside of, that, or just any city and talk to the typical business with maybe 100 employees, most of those businesses aren't going to know the differences between different law schools. So it's not going to really matter to them, but they are going to be concerned about your experience. So I don't recommend that anyone go in-house before working in a law firm, because you're going to get better training in a law firm before that. But no, I don't think that the law school you went to matters for in-house positions, depending on the type of in-house work you want to do. But I would be very careful about committing and saying you want to do in-house right away. Typically, if you ever want to work in a large company, or you want to be a general counsel, then the ranking of your law school does matter. Large companies typically hire from big law firms, and big law firms typically hire from big law schools or the bigger law schools, but that's not always the case. So if you do really well in a low-tiered school and then you get into a big law firm, it gives you a better chance of getting into a big legal department. So the best legal departments tend to be very snobby about the law school you went to, but more importantly, the firm you're coming to and the type of work you have experience doing. In contrast, the smaller companies, many of them have no idea, and you can go to work for them fairly consistently. So I don't think you have anything to worry about if you're not interested in going to work at the biggest companies and you want to go to work at a smaller company, then you can certainly do that regardless of where you went to law school. Now, let's see here. Is your firm compensated by the employer for placements or by the respective employer, or partially from both? No, we're a recruiting firm, a placement firm, so the employers compensate us. It's a very old business. It's been around in terms of this type of model, probably for thousands of years. So most employers will use, legal employers, not all of them, but the majority of them, for filling positions will use outside agencies. And so we just basically go into the market and we'll match people up that they're seeking, and they will compensate us. Let's see here. Do you place National School of Law? So we do not work with, recruiters do not work with law students. We only work with practicing attorneys. But I certainly talk to a lot of law students, which I enjoy, but no, we only work with, but certainly we do place people that graduated from National School of Law in the Nashville area. We just don't place law students. Okay. This is actually a good question. What are the general requirements for an associate from other big law to lateral to a Vault 10 or Vault 5 for a New York office? How many of experience is preferred? So a lot of that depends on the practice area, and I don't know. I'm assuming that in order to get into one of those firms, a lot of that comes down to your practice area and the demand. And so different practice areas are in demand at different points in time. So if corporate is very highly in demand, then that then you may have a better chance. But the idea is that with most of the top law firms, so if you talk like about a Vault 5 or a Vault 10 New York office, let's just talk about some of the best New York law firms. You have Davis Polk, you have, I'm just giving some like Simpson Thatcher, Sullivan and Cromwell, there's some of the best firms. Paul White, I don't know, so these firms, so your Davis Polk is really going to hire mainly from one of these firms, probably, for the most part. There's a bunch of firms here I'm missing that are really good firms, but same thing with your Simpson Thatcher. Your Sullivan Cromwell rarely hires at all. A firm like Cravath, no lateral hiring whatsoever. But Skadden, lots of lateral hiring. They're going to want to get people from some of these firms. So a lot of these firms are very incestuous. The top New York firms, it's just the way, and it's always been this way. It's not so much the school you went to as the firm you're coming from and the experience you have in that firm. So that's how they tend to operate. So they will hire people that are mainly from the firms as opposed to that. The preferable year of experience for laterals to those top firms is anywhere from 2 to 5 years of experience. Sometimes there's a little bit of leeway, meaning you could be maybe 6 years or something like that, possibly 6, but something along those lines. But generally it's 2 to 5 years of experience, sometimes maybe even 7. And this is for associates. They want more than 1 year of experience because they want to make sure what you're doing. And then the only other thing that's important to them is they want to make sure that you have good experience in your practice area that they're hiring for, and that's about it. So a lot of the New York firms are very incestuous in the sense that they believe that people that are trained at these firms that are very similar to each other have learned to do work at a certain quality level, and because of that, they will hire from each other. And the idea is if Davis Polk's hired you, then Skadden Arps is going to be comfortable hiring you. If Skadden Arps hiring you, then Simpson Thatcher is probably going to be comfortable hiring you. So those are the requirements. And the other thing is that each of these firms, typically if you're lateraling to them, they're going to want to be your second firm, not your third firm. So that's the other thing, not third. And the reason is they can afford to be snobby like that because they believe that if you're going to them and it's your third firm in less than 5 years, then you may not stick around. And so they want people that will hopefully stick around for the majority of their career. And I hope that's helpful information. This is stuff that can take a lot of time to understand. And this is something that I do for a living, so I can give you that information. You can always get into one of these firms many times later on. If you ever develop a large book of business or you become very well known in your field and that sort of thing, you can certainly get into them. But for the most part, to get into those New York office, typically they're also going to want you to come from New York, want you to be working in New York to get into them. Okay. Are there statistics to report the return of older workers 55 and do they succeed? Yeah, older workers do succeed. The only problem with a lot of times with hiring older workers is that can they be managed? Will they do the job long term? And do they want the job? These are things we covered today. So the problem is, if you can imagine, if I was to go after having not worked in a law firm for a quarter century, if I was to go work in a law firm now, maybe not quite that long, but if I was to go work in a law firm now, I would not be happy taking orders from people that are 20 years younger than me. So I would do it, but I would not be happy. And so it would be difficult to manage. It's difficult many times to manage older people. And just think about yourself. If you were to just think about it like if you were to go back to, if the economy suddenly got bad and you had to go back and do a job that you did as a teenager, and say you just got out of law school, would you want to do it? Would you be easy to manage or difficult? Say you mowed lawns when you were 15 years old. Would you want to go back doing that job at the age of 25? Would you be easy to manage? Would you stick around? Would you stick around? The odds are probably not. You probably wouldn't. And would you really want that job? Probably not. So these are some of the issues that people run into when they're considering hiring older people. It's not to say that there's age discrimination, but that they're just saying we hate old people because they're old. These are the business reasons that people think that. And just think about yourself if you're young, if you would want to do a job that you did 10 years ago. Okay, let me see. Okay, will it hurt me? This is actually a good question. Will it hurt me if I apply to multiple offices of a large law firm? Will they take me less seriously as a candidate? So most law firms have what are called applicant tracking systems. And so an applicant tracking system is basically what I call an ATS. And that is when you submit your resume online. So if you submit your resume online to the firm, you don't email them your resume and so forth, that means that the firm is probably going to know if you're applying to other places. But some large law firms do not use applicant tracking systems. In some large law firms, all of the resumes go directly into to a recruiting person in an individual office. And so that is just something to be aware of. But yeah, if you're applying, so we're very careful. For example, we work with candidates that may be interested in multiple offices of a firm. But a lot of times we want to make sure that we're applying them only to the places where where the firm's likely to hire them. But you need to make sure, what are your connections to each market? If you're applying to multiple offices, then you just need to be careful, because multiple offices, if you have no connections, say you're from Phoenix and the firm has an office in Phoenix and Los Angeles, and you're from Phoenix, and then if you apply to Los Angeles and Phoenix, it's not going to look good. If you're working in Phoenix, apply to, I don't know, I'm capitalizing these, in Phoenix and Los Angeles, the same law firms, then the law firm's going to wonder, why are you interested in Los Angeles? This is what the Phoenix office is going to wonder. And they're going to think this person could be suddenly pick up and move to Phoenix, and that's not good for us. That would actually or move to Los Angeles if they're going to interview for Phoenix. Why are they interested in another market? So you just have to look at it from the employer's point of view. And if they see you're just casting a wide net. The other thing too is you also want the employer to believe that you're marketable. You have a lot of options. The employers like chase too. They like to chase, and so they want to feel like they can chase you and you're going to be interested in them and all that sort of thing. If they feel like you're going to go anywhere you get a job, then that makes you seem less desirable. So you typically want to be a little bit careful with that. Okay, let's see here. This is great, amazing questions today. Thank you so much, everyone, for asking these questions. Let's see. These are really helpful for just a lot of people, I think, because not any questions you guys can ask is just great. Do you have any additional advice for lawyers who are willing to find a job in a new country, for example, the USA, but they don't come from a privileged country? They have good education, work experience, but in the non-privileged country. Typically, the route to getting a job in the United States is you can either get an LLM, and then you can work in certain markets, and you can always do that, or you can also get a JD. So those are most of the time better off with the JD. So you're going to always be better off with the JD. So that's the best way of doing that. Lots of people come over to the US and get an LLM. That can get you in the door at different law firms, but it's very hard. And if you get a JD, that can make it much easier. And it doesn't matter that the country you're not coming from is privileged. I know all sorts of attorneys from non-privileged countries that have jobs in the United States and were able to get great jobs here. But at the same time, you want to be very careful about, you're just not going to be able to get an attorney job without getting the degree. And then also you need to pass the bar in whatever state you want to work in. Okay, there's another good question here. Let me see here. Appreciate these seminars, thank you. What are some additional ways to address additional time off and reassure potential employers that a candidate is committed to working hard for the long term? So it depends on the reasons you took time off, and people take time off for different reasons. But everyone who's a law student or a young attorney should know that any time off, once you start practicing law, it's just considered very suspect. I don't know why it is. You're told early in your career to never take too much time off from practicing law. You need to be very careful if you take time off, and it's just not ever a good idea at all. And so you want to be very careful about taking any time off once you start practicing law. And it just doesn't give a lot of, it scares employers. But in terms of the way to convince employers that you're willing to, that you're committed to working hard for the long term, a lot of times if you've been doing, one of the things I like to see on resumes, and I've seen people do, is even though they've taken time off, they continue taking CLEs because they're enthusiastic about what they're doing. So they've taken courses and done other related things during their time off. They may have taken it for family reasons and taken care of a parent or something like that. Or they may, when you go into interviews, you may indicate you need to, you're raising a family and all this sort of thing. Many times when people do take time off, though, the problem is that a lot of times when I've seen people do that, it repeats itself again. There's some reason that they took time off to begin with and they were unhappy. So you need anything you can do that's really convincing someone that's not the case. And then when you do go in to your position, you need to stay there and really commit and try to stay in the job a long period of time and not be looking. That's my recommendation in terms of what I would do, but that is going to be my recommendation. But yeah, just anything to do that shows you're still interested in practicing law. You've taken CLE courses, you've read this, you've done this, maybe you write a paper or something in your practice area, just anything that shows you're still committed and interested in practicing law, because that goes a long way if people see that, and that can be very helpful. Okay, it says, I missed the beginning of the webinar. This is just a quick question. Let's answer this real quickly. Are there written materials or can I access the recording later? What were the 3 questions? So the 3 questions are, let me see, I think, can you do the job? Will you do the job long term? Or will you commit to the job? Commit to the job. And I think it's the other one is, do you want the job? But I will put that article at the end here. And I've broken it down. This webinar today was based on a webinar, not a webinar, but a series of articles I've written that hit on those 3 things. And there's a lot of stuff that I've written, but I think the name of the article is the only 3 reasons a law firm will hire you or something along those lines. Okay, let's see here. I understand the legal field can be trial by fire, but is this constant in every firm? I have found that to be the main cause of burnout, and the comments from supervising attorneys are dismissive. Are there firms that are focused on investing in the associates? Are we dispensable? Okay, yeah, there are firms that are focused on investing in associates. The big thing that I would say is that it many times depends on the size of the firm. So the largest firms many times will make the working there almost very difficult, because they'll make advancement difficult, they'll make getting work difficult, they'll make all these things difficult, because the idea is that if everyone's competing with each other, it's going to increase the quality of work and providing better work to the clients. And then basically that's it. And then if they pay a lot of money, they're going to get the best attorneys and they'll use their brands and so forth to attract people. So that it's, I don't know if the word is dispensable. It's more along the lines of that they're trying to drive the hardest, the best work possible out of people. But I think that there are firms that are focused on investing in associates. There's a lot of them that don't like the cost of turnover, and there's many that aren't like that. And I've spoken about this several times before, but I've noticed that people that start their careers and practice law in smaller to mid-sized markets typically have much longer term legal careers than people that start their careers in major markets and do that. I think that smaller firms many times and in smaller markets tend to be better places where people get along and they figure out how to protect each other, as opposed to larger firms that are working for large clients and so forth and are up and out and where there is a lot of turnover and so forth. And so if it was me starting my career over and I really did want to work in a law firm, I would think about smaller markets and mid-sized markets as well. The large firms can be very stressful in many cases. And so that is just something that I would recommend, maybe looking at smaller firms. And the smaller firms are interested in that. And there's a lot of larger firms too that do invest very heavily in their associates. But many times those firms are not in the major markets. The biggest markets are your New Yorks and Los Angeles, because they have a large field of people to draw from. Anytime a big firm in New York or Los Angeles or Palo Alto has a job, they're going to get a ton of applicants for those jobs. And so they can have very high expectations and know that there's always going to be people that are going to come in and work very hard. And that makes it difficult for associates because it makes them dispensable. Whereas if you work in smaller to mid-sized markets, very few people are trying to work there. And the balance of power to a great extent shifts to you. But in a market like New York City, wow, an associate doesn't have, if you think because you went to Harvard and you work at a big firm that you're desirable, there's 50 other people like you, and that's the problem. And if you're in a mid-sized market like Cleveland, there's hardly anybody like you. And it's just something to think about. Big fish, small pond versus big fish, big pond. I will be back in 1 second. I'm just going to grab another coffee real quick, and then I'll get through. There's still a lot of questions to get through, and I'm excited to answer them all. But back in 1 minute. Thanks. Okay, great. So let's go back. Let me just see here. Sorry about that break real quick. I just need to check on something. Okay, it says here, is there a good way to decipher whether a partner is difficult to work with? You touched on how firms tend to hire individuals that think will mesh well with other employees and their work culture. However, it's difficult to assess from an interview whether the partner is going to throw you into the fire. Do you have advice for individuals to try to assess whether a partner is toxic? Yes, I do. So literally, there are certain large law firms, lots of them, that will hire people specifically to work with a partner that is difficult and who cycles through people. And so you need to ask, would I be working with you, or would I be working with different people, and try to understand and assess that information during the interview stage if possible. That's the first thing. And in terms of how to tell whether or not the partner's toxic, one of the things is to see how much the person's willing to connect with you. People that are toxic typically know they're toxic and will avoid you and will avoid connecting with you. And if they avoid connecting with you at the interview stage and they seem like they're going to be difficult, then you should be careful. And so people that are not toxic will actually be very interested and easy to get along with. The other thing I would recommend is many times when you interview with other associates, ask who was the last person to work with this person and that sort of thing, and try to get an understanding of who that person may have worked with previously. And if you understand that information, that can also be very helpful. So understanding if the person worked with someone that was difficult previously can definitely teach you quite a bit. So that is basically the way to do that. And so asking those sorts of questions about what happened to the previous person. Okay, let me see. This looks like a really good question too. Wow, these are just awesome questions today. Okay, just out of curiosity, do the top law firms conduct interviews in a similar structure like the top consulting firms like McKinsey, Bain, BCG, or like some other hedge funds like Blackstone, Goldman Sachs, Bloomberg, or even the top technological outlets like Google, Facebook, or some other startup unicorn companies? I would like to know if top law firms go to the extreme, and according to the area of expertise like corporate law is some consulting firms. And then the case interview rounds, which includes the riddles, data analysis, and teamwork and other behavioral questions, like the airport question. Do these top firms apply the same interview procedures with offices located abroad or just in the USA? If so, what is the whole purpose of these top law firms to copy? Okay, I don't think law firms do that. I think most of the interviews that law firms do are just that I've seen some law firms do this sort of things, but most top law firms are competing with other top law firms, and most attorneys are interviewed more in a conversational style. They're not asked riddles and so forth. A lot of times, a lot of these technology companies and investment banks and stuff do that. But for the most part, law firms are just conduct fairly simple interviews. I think law firms, I don't know why they haven't gone into this the way that the consulting firms have, but consulting firms have been interviewing people like this for as long as I can remember. And law firms have been interviewing kind of the way they do. So interviews with law firms are fairly straightforward. And I don't really think that they're copying consulting firms and so forth in terms of their interview methods. Let's see. Okay, here's another good question. I'm glad people are, and I'm catching up to everybody's questions and that I've asked them because there was a lot earlier too. It is almost summer and I don't yet have a job lined up. I would like to work at a law firm and still reaching up to smaller, but it seems like options are drying up. Do I need to consider government public interest at this point, and what types of jobs make me unqualified to work in a law firm later? No. So I would recommend that if worse comes to worse, you can always stop by law firms. I hate to be very aggressive, but you can stop by law firms in your home market where you're from and just tell them you want to work for free in the summer if you don't have a job by then. And it is important to try to, if you want to work in a law firm after graduation, where you are from, and ask about a job. It is important to do your best to bond with, to try to get into a law firm, especially if it's your second summer and that's what you want to do. It's not going to make you unqualified if you get a government job or something, but at the same time, you should get in, you should do your best to get into a law firm. And law firms will hire people if they work for free and they're not dumb, or for a little bit of money. And so if you can get a law firm to do that with you, that would be my last option. But my advice would be to try to work at smaller firms. Think about what you may want to do for a practice area and find people that do that. Anybody can get a job that works very hard and commits to trying to get a job in a law firm. And that's really how I would handle that, as I would do my absolute best to try to find a job if I could. And really apply to as many places as you can. You need a place where you have a connection. There's a famous book, by the way, and I don't remember what it's called, but I've written about it before. And when you're looking for a job, one of the things you can always do is you should, and this goes for experienced attorneys as well as non-experienced attorneys, and this is a job search method for people. You should always write down a list of everyone and ask, and typically most people will have about 100 people. And then those 100 people ask if they know of any jobs. I know you could be asking relatives, you could be asking friends, you could be asking all sorts of people. But the point is, everybody, if 100 people, and the other person knows 100 people, that's basically you're giving yourself, I guess what was that number? 100 times 10,000 opportunities to find a position. And this is actually kind of a secret that is very interesting, and it's actually, and it works. There's a lot of classes where people teach you how to get business and so forth if you're an attorney. And this particular method of finding jobs and so forth is very important. So if someone was to ask you if you knew of any jobs, you might tell them about the 15 places that you interviewed with, or 5 places you interviewed with. And you might tell them about the places that your friends got jobs. And so if you ask 100 people that, it can actually be very effective. You have to put yourself out there a little bit. And the best way to do it, of course, is to make contact with people by phone and tell them you're looking for a job. But relatives, friends, people, dry cleaner, all sorts of people. I've heard of people getting jobs from all sorts of people. So that's just one job search method. And people like to hire. I said earlier in this webinar that I've hired a lot of people. Most of the people that I've hired to work in our company as recruiters, which work with candidates, have been people that have come through referrals. And so getting referrals is very important. And this is just one way to do it. And I'm sure someone on this call or webinar will follow that, and it'll work because it works very well. But I would apply to all the firms you can. The number of firms out there, by the way, is astonishing. I don't care what city you're in the country. There are just tons of employers everywhere. I'm just random US, let's do random US city. Random US city generators. Let's do a random US city. Okay, let's do Fresno. Do you have Fresno? So Fresno legal employers, Fresno law firms. All these law firms in Fresno, Fresno is not a great area. A lot of people don't like it, but look at this. There's over 100 law firms just that are coming up. There's tons of them. By the way, all this stuff surrounded the desert. But you can find jobs, and there's law firms in every single city. And the big mistake that most people make is they don't apply to all the firms and opportunities that are out there. And so you need to do whatever you can to apply to every firm you possibly can find. Okay, I'm a recent grad from a non-ABA law school, top of the class, numerous honors. Some of the bigger law firms than myself from the school. The non-ABA school was a night school program enabling a Kenyan to work full time. The opportunity grows a professional. I study the law. I consider applying these large firms anyway. It's addressing the issue in the cover letter. I'm worried that I will look desperate or worse and be off-putting. Okay, so the point of the law degree, which a lot of people don't understand, and the law degree and the bar, is the larger point, is you get a license to open a business. So that's really the big thing. You get a license to open a business where you can charge people by the hour, or project to perform legal work, which is great. So it doesn't really matter where you go to school. I know someone that I'm working with right now that went to, if it's accredited, I guess it is accredited, but barely accredited law school, that never worked for anyone, never could get a job in a law firm, and is not even from this country. And she started a law firm that does $25 million a year in revenue, in a practice area. Revenue. No training, no law firm experience, nothing. When people get upset about the fact that no one's hiring them because of the quality of their law school, what I tell them is that you have a license to open a business, and that's something that no one can take away from you unless you do something illegal. And you can charge people by the hour and the project to perform legal work, and you can run this business, and you can be very successful, and you can really, for the most part, do what you can achieve and be whatever you want to be with a law degree. You don't need to rely on large law firms to hire you. When I was in high school, I applied to this college. It doesn't really matter, but it was this college where you could go for free that was in the desert. It was called Deep Springs College. And for whatever reason, I thought I wanted to go there. And I went out there, and all these people had beards and just they weren't anything like me. And it didn't go well, my visit, and they didn't even reject me because I think they just figured I wasn't interested in them, and I was upset about it. But the point is, you have to go where people like you and where they accept you. And so if you're not getting into a big law firm, why even bother? Not bother, but why try to explain away? Try to go to a place where you might not be happy. I certainly wouldn't try to get a job working in many different types of places because I wouldn't be happy. Imagine I don't think anybody should try to work someplace where people are not going to accept them because of who they are. That's crazy. So there's nothing wrong with going to a non-ABA law school. You get a license to open a business, and you can do with that license whatever you want. And I don't think you should allow anyone to influence how you feel about yourself because you're not getting a job in a big firm. The point of the matter is almost every attorney in the country can get a big job in a big firm. And who cares? You can do much better, probably be much happier not working in a big firm. And why go someplace where you're not going to be accepted or happy? If you really wanted to, you probably could figure out a way to get into a big firm. But the problem with big firms is big firms represent big clients, and big clients, and this is the reason, by the way, that law schools matter, because I'm sure that why law schools matter. I just want to make sure that everyone understands this and why it matters to employers. If you are, let's say you are, what's a big law firm? I don't know, Skadden Arps. Say you're Skadden Arps, and you're representing Facebook. So what that law firm is going to do is they're going to go out and they're going to do a pitch to Facebook. They're going to do a pitch, and so in the pitch, they say, "This is who's going to be on our team." Or trying to represent Facebook. We're going to tell Facebook, "Pitch. This is who's on our team. We've got 2 graduates from Columbia, this person from Stanford, blah blah blah. This is what and etc." And they're going to basically talk about how great and how smart their people are, and they're going to say, and congratulate, and we're only going to charge you, and their billing rates are 800, 1100, whatever, and 1600, 1400 an hour or whatever. And so if they put down whatever this unaccredited law school is, and then they're going to talk about all your honors and all this honors, and so if they talk about whatever this unaccredited law school is, it's just not going to look good to the client. And so and the client doesn't care. Facebook doesn't care that you work 2 nights or whatever. They just want to hire, Facebook's rich, and they want to hire the fanciest lawyers they possibly can. So it's not that Skadden Arps or whoever the firm is doesn't like you or doesn't think you can do the work. It's just that's the business realities of the thing. These big clients want to get the absolute fanciest and well-credentialed attorneys they can get, and that's it. It's nothing to do with you personally, and so that's it. So if regardless of where you went to law school, you still have a license to open a business and to run a business and to work in other places, and certain people are never going to get to do these types of work. Now, you don't have to represent Facebook. You can sue Facebook. You don't have to defend them, which Skadden Arps would do. You can sue Facebook with your unaccredited law school, but you can't. You probably can't work for Skadden Arps because they have to impress clients and they have to look like that. The other thing is they have to impress their staff, so they have to impress other attorneys. So other attorneys want to work with people like themselves. I'll tell you a sad story, and it's not really that sad, but I'll tell it anyway. So I have a friend, and he went to an unaccredited law school, but then he got a series of LLMs, and the final one he got was at Harvard. And he got hired at a big New York law firm in their Los Angeles office. But even though he had all these LLMs, and so it ultimately looked like he went to Harvard Law School, he really went to an unaccredited law school. And what ended up happening to him was he got to this big New York law firm and no one would give him any work to do. And so he sat around and almost went crazy for 6 months with no work. Then he got a job at another firm that was a good firm, and they gave him tons and tons of work to do. But when it came time to make him partner, they told him he wouldn't make partner because of where he went to law school, even though he had worked his tail off while he was there. This stuff is not cool. It's just there is a lot of discrimination against schools and so forth, and there's nothing that you can do about it. And this person's still my friend, and he's had a very successful career, but he certainly didn't do it with a big law firm. And it's not to say that if you went to a non-accredited law school, you can never get into a big law firm. But a lot of people that go to non-accredited law schools will go get an LLM or something later on sometimes to do it. So I hope that's helpful. I know that's not necessarily the happiest thing to listen to, but I did want to tell everybody why the law schools matter to employers so much. Okay, in the process of applying to a big firm, and they've certainly showed interest. Oh, let me just see here. Showed interest. I'm right now considering reaching out to partners directly identified who might be interested in having me join or considering interviewing me. Some may have work to give me right now, and others may have probably submitted for a year or two. What advice would you give for making those connections to get the interview? Many times I've been under the mistaken impression many times that partners have a lot of authority when it comes to hiring. And in all honesty, many times, and even the largest law firms, there's only like a couple of people that can make the final decisions about who to hire, because ultimately most partners are working for the law firm as well. If the law firm's shown interest, then I would plan on just waiting for things to play themselves out. In order to get connections that you're identified, I'm not sure if you're talking about the current firm or a new firm, but yeah, if you, may have worked here, if you're trying to make those connections, my advice would be to just reach out to them and maybe call them or something if you have any reason to. If you don't, they may not look at it in the right way, because you just need to be careful. But I don't know why they would be interested in having you join or interviewing you, but if it is the same firm that you're talking about here, I would let the process play itself out with the firm. I don't think you want to hightail the process and go past who's ever showing interest in you at this point, because that could potentially upset them. The time of day or week, this is actually a good question. That's best for reaching out to legal staff or law firm partners looking for a job. Yes, I have an article. It's called, you should read it. It's called Always Interview on Fridays. I like Fridays because Fridays people tend to be in better moods. And if you interview on Fridays, then you're often much more likely to get a job. So I think Fridays are always typically the best time to reach out to people. There's also studies about like when's the best time to do a webinar. So the best days to do webinars typically are Wednesday and Thursday at the time we're doing them. Wednesday and Thursday around 10 a.m. because there's less, people have more time, good time as well. But I recommend on Fridays. The reason I like Fridays is just because people are relaxed, they're in a good mood, they're relaxed, less critical, ready for weekend, and so forth. That's why I typically think those are the best times to interview. But that's, so those are the time that I would recommend. Early in the week, recruiting staff tend to be just completely overwhelmed trying to respond to resumes and do all sorts of stuff. So I just would be very careful. Okay. Earlier in the week, because earlier in the week you might get a more critical eye and so forth. Mentioned that large law firms have better training. Let's see, training is important to me, but I think it would be right fit for me in a big law firm. How do I go about identifying places outside of law firms that would have good training? Okay, it's not necessarily the training. Most of the training that an attorney does is going to be their own training, but it's modeling, it's what's acceptable in terms of the work quality and what's not. So the best and the biggest law firms will have very high standards for the type of work that they do, and different attorneys will have different types of standards. It's not necessarily the training, it's the type of standards that are acceptable for the individual firm and wherever you go and the person that you're working with. If you work with very talented attorneys, then they're typically going to give you very good training. And if you don't, then you may not get as good a training. So I recommend trying to work for the best attorneys you can. Even if it's a small firm, sometimes you could work for an exceptional attorney in a small firm. The odds are pretty good that there's wherever market you're in, even if you're in a very small market with 10 firms, there's probably some very good attorneys in one of those 10 firms that you could work with. So I don't think the training necessarily matters. One of the best experiences I had, though, in terms of training was I was able to work with a federal judge for a year, and he certainly had the time to educate me on how to do good work and so forth. The better people you work with, the better off you'll typically be. So that's the training. The large law firms, I don't remember really any kind of formal training systems working in a large law firm. The only training that I got was from other associates there that I worked with, and occasionally some good input from partners. Just as a follow-up question, if a law firm asks why I don't have a job lined up for the summer, is it bad to admit I don't yet have an offer? This seems like a very difficult dance between looking desirable and being honest. Any advice would be appreciated. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with being honest, and I would just tell them you don't have a job yet. People love giving other people chances. It's better to be vulnerable than not. Anytime someone reveals their weaknesses to you, our natural human instinct is to want to help that person. And if someone's trying to cover up their weaknesses, our natural human instinct is to do the opposite. So you're always better off being vulnerable than non-vulnerable. If I tell you that I just remember I was talking to this girl that I ended up hiring, by the way, to work for us, and she still works for us. And she was from New York City and had gone to, all these Ivy League, went to an Ivy League college and Ivy League law school, and then went to this fancy prep school in New York City. And I started talking to her, and there was every reason that this person could have come across acting like she was a big deal and fancy and everything. But instead of doing that, she started talking to me about how her mother was a maid and had immigrated from this country, and she grew up as in a single parent household, and she got a scholarship to this. And so instead of like her coming across as like this, and she was working at a big law firm, is this person that could have been all arrogant and stuff and looked like she was very fancy and entitled to the job, she came across as the exact opposite and looked vulnerable. And anytime you look vulnerable to an employer, their natural instinct is to want to help you. And not only did I help her, I got her the job that she wanted. It was an in-house job, but then I told her if she ever wanted something to, contact me again, and I'd love to hire her, and I did. So people that are vulnerable, it's a very good thing. You mentioned discrimination against lawyers who went to not great law schools facing a lot of discrimination. What about a lawyer who went to great law school but a small, not top-ranked college? I don't think people face discrimination against the colleges they went to really at all. They may. I think that most people have a lot of respect for people that went to small colleges and then were able to take that experience and get into large law firms or large great schools. I don't think that matters. One of the, yeah, I don't think that's really that important. One of the things when people look at our pedigrees, this is just a quick lecture about pedigrees here. When people look at pedigrees, which are schools, families, jobs, really what they're asking is, there's different things, but they're asking things like they're trying to just, they're asking what are our values and expectations. A lot of times, if you grow up in a certain type of family, your family's going to have a certain type of expectation. If you've worked for a certain type of employer, your employer is going to have certain types of expectations. And we take our schools you'll be around certain types of people. And so those expectations will rub off on you, and your family will rub off on you. So when I speak with someone and I ask them, what did you do? And they tell me their parents were attorneys, I automatically know that the odds if that person's also an attorney, that they're probably going to be pretty good at it, because they're going to know what the lifestyle's like. They're going to know how to navigate being a professional with kids or whatever. And I know if someone's worked at a large law firm, I know. So when people ask pedigrees, they're really asking, what are our values and expectations, and what have we learned from our environment? And sometimes I noticed, when I went to law school, I was very surprised. I went to a public law school, like University of Virginia, and I was very surprised that the majority of people there went to these really great colleges. And there's really no reason for that, because everything's based on your LSAT and your grades to go to most law schools. And I think they must have done that because their admissions people wanted to bring together people that were coming out of had certain types of pedigrees that, indicated potential success, maybe. Potential success. I don't know, because I would think that they could just as easily admit people from not the top ranked colleges and so forth as not, and they didn't. I did notice when I went to college, I went to University of University of Chicago, and I knew a couple people that had come out of very small schools in Oklahoma and stuff that flunked out and just did horribly there. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that maybe they weren't prepared, and they'd gone to, even though they might have been touring and stuff in high school, they didn't have those sort of expectations from the schools and the kids they went to school with, and maybe from their families who were farmers and things. I don't know, but they didn't understand that. So that's one of the things that a pedigree is meaningful to some extent, and why it can matter. Let me just see a couple more questions. A lot of questions today. Is it possible to address salaries here? Invite you to a second interview, not sure how much you want to be paid. So law firms will ask that all the time, and it's a very dangerous question. They typically will use it as a way to eliminate you. I had an instance recently when I was working with someone that was very close to getting an offer as a partner in a major law firm. And the problem was that she was making a lot of money in her previous job, much, much more than the new firm could afford to pay her. It just seems not something that, it's something to be careful of. Now, this person you're talking about, you're a third-year associate doing commercial litigation in Miami. So I want to say this, I'm going to say this to everyone on the call, and this is not going to be something that you want to hear, but I'm going to say it anyway. Your objective between the years of 1 and 7 years is to get all the experience, salaries and stuff. Sure, you can worry about them. But that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is the quality of the experience you get. The quality of the experience you get is sorry. So the quality of the experience is really what you need to be most concerned about, and the better experience you get, the better. If you ask about salaries, all you want to say is, I hope that I get salaries that are competitive with what other people here are getting paid, or something along those lines, and leave it at that. A lot of times people will ask, what is your current salary? And then they use that to see if you'd be interested in them. And you need to be careful there. It's just, salary is a real minefield. And more often than not, law firms, you have to understand if they really need you. So you're doing commercial litigation. Commercial litigation is tough because there's a lot of commercial litigators out there. And so the law firm doesn't can hire people to do that job, probably has a lot of people trying to do that job. Now, if you were doing something like a very unique form of patent law or something, then they would need to step up and pay you the market or whatever they could. But for certain practice areas, you just need to be very careful. So I would always, when people ask you about your salary, I would just say, I would be very vague about it. And I would say, if you're overpaid, I would say, I'm overpaid right now. I don't expect to make that much, and that sort of thing. I know people like to make as much money as possible, and there's definitely nothing wrong with wanting to make money, especially when you're young, because you want to buy a house and save money and pay off loans. But I would be very careful about how you answer those questions. And if the firm doesn't pay the salary you want, then just find another job or another firm and don't take the job. But that's how I would recommend. And I would just say, I would also ask, if they ask you how much you're going to be paid, I would ask them, what are other people making my position? And if they tell you, then you can say that's acceptable to me or something along those lines, and get through that. But typically the salary information is something that gets in the way. And I'm interviewing right now for a position that I have a salary, and the salaries for the job that I'm hiring for are anywhere between $50,000 a year and $200,000 a year in a large market for doing the same job. Obviously a little bit nervous about that, and I don't want to hire someone and pay them too much money. I'm trying to find, the best. When I ask people that question, and people ask me, candidates are actually asking me, what are you paying? I'm nervous about if I tell someone in a big market that I'm not paying $200,000 a year, that they won't like me. So I just have to be careful. Okay, let's see here. Okay, this is actually a good question. I like this. I see a lot of students bragging about summer associate hours in LinkedIn and social media, but I'm annoyed seeing this and feel like it's very pompous. I've been told by people that it's a bad idea to do this, but I also see people from top firms doing it with good social skills. Is this just how legal professions bragging how much you're doing constantly starts to be encouraged? No, people that brag like that are basically, they want to be seen, and so people do things for different reasons. But a lot of people are motivated by feeling important. People want to feel fundamental human needs, and one of them, feel important. Everyone wants to feel important. So the farther you move away from that, the better off you're going to be. So it's ego and all that sort of thing. And you have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so moving beyond that, I think, is the most important thing. If people are motivated by others' opinions of them, then their whole life and career are going to be motivated by that. And I see people do this all the time. Like they put all their emphasis on how their achievements, their schools, their jobs and stuff look to others. And honestly, I don't think that, I think that being competitive and trying to get the best job you can is a good quality. But I also think that doing things because of how they look to others is something that I wish people would move away from. I think that the most important thing really that you can do as a young attorney is just to concentrate on doing your absolute best at your job, and on doing your best and doing the best you can. I had an interesting experience when I was young. I had an interview. I showed up at this law firm in Washington, D.C. I'll never forget it. It was Dickinson, I think, and it was during a snowstorm or something. And only one other attorney had shown up, and he was a partner. And he interviewed me. And during the interview, he started asking me about what was important to me and stuff. And I talked about doing good work and, trying to improve as an attorney and stuff. And this was as a summer associate job. And he took off his glasses and he said, have you ever worked in a law firm? This is a competitive place. Like, people are going to be out to get you. It's not a healthy thing. And I said, well, that may be the case. I've always concentrated on just doing the best I can and not worrying about other people and what other people think of me, because ultimately I think the quality of the work that I do and stuff will make the biggest difference. And that's how it is in the world. Like, people worry about other people. I get attacked and vilified, and people will say bad things about you, or you'll be competitive with other people. But this particular guy, he then ended up taking me out to lunch. The firm didn't have any openings in that office that they interviewed for me for, but he recommended that I interview with them in the Detroit office. And for a couple of years later, he used to send me notes and stuff. And he was an old guy. He was probably like in his late 60s at that point, but he really respected that. And that's something that I've always tried to live my career by, is just doing the best work you can and really committing to whatever you're doing. Obviously, I'm committed to what I'm doing now. I'm talking to you guys, but if you do that, then you'll have a good career. And that's what the best attorneys do. You don't worry about other people. And they're not doing it because they want to see how other people see them. They're doing it because they like it and because they do a good job. And one of the things I was talking earlier about law school, people that come out of Yale Law School are, for the most part, don't care as much about, they probably do to some extent in different ways, but they're not concerned about how they look in terms of the law firm they're working at and so forth. They have a lot of self-confidence built in because they're going to Yale Law School. And that informs a lot of their decisions. And things are done by kind of a different value system. And your value system has to be internal, and you can't really worry about what other things as well. Okay, here's another question. This is a good question. Okay, how should we pursue, or let me see, just to answer the why our firm question. I've been told that talking about culture is a bad idea, and I think bringing up things like collegiality have hurt me in past interviews. What are the law firms expecting to bring up? Why our firm is a general question, but I think one of the things that you should try to do is you should try to move beyond the concrete, which is things, the reputation and so forth, to the people and other stuff about the firm. Anything that makes a connection. So anything that makes a connection is going to be important. So if you can make a connection with people, things that people have said. So if someone says, why our firm? Then you say things like, I feel like I could do well working with such and comfortable, or I've always wanted to work this is a good opportunity for me. I realize I'm not coming from as good of a firm, but I've always wanted to work at a firm of this caliber and improve as an attorney. This firm is this practice area. They have a lot of experience, something I've always wanted to do, and give a reason. So anything that makes a connection. So you always want to try to make a connection with people to the extent you can. And that goes, there's another question here. Is there any way to make a connection in your resume? Yeah, there is. So a lot of times people will put in things about their interests and so forth, and it may be like cooking, tennis, who knows. But anything that personalizes you is important. So anything you can do to personalize yourself instead of just beyond your resume is important. And that can help make a connection. I once saw someone get hired because they had something about, it was a very competitive market. It was in 2001 or 2002. There were no corporate jobs in the United States hardly to speak of. And there was one opening at a firm a big firm in Denver. And someone put in something on their resume about the fact that they did some sort of, I don't know, what is it called? Snowboarding, some type of snowboarding, and they were really good at it. And a partner at the firm saw that, and this person's resume jumped out over all the resumes, hundreds of resumes they probably would receive. And so that made a connection, and then they talked about that. So, anything in your resume that shows your interest, that may make you look personal to some extent, is a good way to make a connection. Okay, do law firms do background checks on potential hires? Some of them do and some of them don't. It depends on the firm. There's sometimes there's companies that do background checks, and there's also, sometimes you'll just call your employer. If they do a background check, they can do all sorts of things. They can check your criminal history, they can check your driving record and things, but most of them aren't doing that, especially with associates. Most of them are really relying on the fact that you've gone to law school, the bar's done the background check and so forth. So there really isn't a lot of background checks. Let's see. Okay, let me just see here. I think I'm almost done with questions. Oh, how hard is it to get, this is a good question. How hard is it to get a federal clerkship? Do the three questions just apply to clerkships? So clerkships they're difficult to get, but not that difficult. You should apply to a lot of different judges. Typically, either Democrat or Republican, and some of them are from certain ethnic groups and so forth. And so they like hiring people that are similar to them in terms of the background. To the extent you can, it's always a good idea to do that. I recommend applying to a lot of clerkships. Judges can hire pretty much whomever they want to clerk for them. They'll hire people that they like and that they feel will do the best job they possibly can. And on that one. Okay, well, I think this is another question. I'm just going to answer this one real quick because this is a good one. One is the best way to try to get a job in the smaller law firm. Typically in a smaller law firm, you want to reach out to the hiring partner or the name partner. That's the best one, the name partner's name partner. That's how I would do that. And I would contact every small law firm you can and try to find ones where you have connections. All right, thank you. And I appreciate all the questions this week. These were great questions, and I will talk to everyone next week. And also, I'd recommend if you do have any more questions to write them down and we can speak next week. But thanks for a great webinar. And honestly, the questions everyone asked today were just really awesome. And I did appreciate everyone today for asking so many questions.